Neil, I don't really know how to look at this. I mean, if you look at the numbers, 1,000 deaths, that's a big number. The markets are at a record high. Do they not know how to price it, or do they think we're over the worst?
Well, I would say it's still, most people would say we're still in a very great period of uncertainty. We're really not sure if we can believe the statistics out of China, and we're going to wait, I think, to see in the next 2 weeks how much of China comes back to work. And I think if you're a migrant worker, are you going to go back to Wuhan in a hurry to suddenly start picking up your old job? I think we could see some resistance to coming back to work. But I would also say internationally, you know, British Airways has just suspended flights until April the 1st. So we're going to start seeing a little bit of over, but I think the market response, to answer your question, is overwhelmed by the Fed liquidity.
Okay, do you agree with that, Peter?
Yeah, Fed liquidity, I was waiting for that point. If you hadn't made it, I would have made it myself. So everyone's thinking about, right, this is going to have a significant impact in Q1, maybe into Q2. Uncertainty over whether this is going to be a V-shaped recovery, a U or an L. But the one thing which does seem to be with great certainty is that the Fed at some point will be there with liquidity on tap, probably rate cuts. And that is driving markets, and it's driving markets into an asset bubble, which they themselves say that is on the radar. So at some point, I think the game has to stop, but not yet.
We see here, gentlemen, and thank you, Neil, for bringing up the British Air news. I see that sourced out of Sky News in London. Neil Dwane, the timeline here is extended. This is stunning that British Air is looking out to the A word, April versus March as well. What is the timeline linkage to your markdown of China GDP?
Well, I think we're all looking for previous precedents that we can try and price across increasingly many industries. One thing I think is interesting, if you go back to the earthquake in 1998 in Taiwan, they lost 7 days production of technology, and it affected the whole technology sector for a year. So, and there were supply shortages of chips and products for that Christmas. So I think we all are sort of trying to feel, we know that the auto sector in South Korea is already impacted by a loss of components from the Wuhan area. So Hyundai and Kia are no longer making stuff in South Korea. So I think all that we're trying to do is collect the bottom-up evidence, meet companies to see what they're doing.
Right.
And personally, I mean, I was supposed to be in South Korea next week. I'm not going. They didn't want me to travel. I didn't want to travel. So I think progressively more and more of us, both corporately and as individuals, are going to be making our own decisions, which could well be demand destruction rather than demand deferred.
That's a really important concept there, the destruction and the deferred, folks. Peter Chatwell of Mizuho, really simply here, are the markets really adjusting to a central bank markdown where central banks worldwide go all accommodative?
Yeah, you can't think about just one central bank, the Fed, going on their own. It has to be followed by the other major central banks because of the FX channel, which will be operated on. So it has to be a concerted effort, unfortunately.